What caused this speech delay? That's a deeply important question, and one that parents ask often, sometimes with worry or guilt. The truth is, speech and language delays are common, and they have many possible causes, not just one. Most experts today agree that it is rarely a single factor, but rather a combination of influences that shape how communication develops. Today, we're going to unpack some of those causes, and more importantly, how you can make a difference in the lives of those who need the gift of communication. This is the third of an episode series that I have started on speech and language delays. I am using questions that are asked of me often by parents. If you have your own question, you are welcomed to email me at hello@thelanguageofplay.com or scroll down to the show notes and you can leave a voice message for me, and I will be creating these episodes based on your questions about speech and language delays. Does your child have a speech-language delay and you really want them to talk? Do difficult behaviors derail home life and you know the frustration is a communication struggle? Does your child see a speech therapist and you wonder, what do they do and how can I help? If these or similar questions are in your mind, this podcast is for you. Hello, my name is Dinalynn Rosenbusch. I am a speech-language pathologist that has worked with children from birth to 21 for 3 decades. And in my classrooms, I see you wanting to connect with the heart of your child, but their speech and language skills create a barrier. So if you have a kiddo that has difficult behaviors, needs to expand their language or learn to say speech sounds, and maybe even receives speech therapy, stay tuned, because in this podcast, you will learn how to use your daily life as a tool to communication practice and how to do that practice. You will become confident knowing you are making the difference you want to make. And you will hear success stories of parents who have navigated these struggles already. We'll do this all while focusing on building deep, meaningful connection and confidence in your kiddo. So grab a cup of coffee along with a notebook and pen. It's time to speak in the way your child's brain understands. And that is the language of play. Hello, listeners. It is always a joy to be here with you. As we get started, I'm going to read a review, and I haven't done that for a long time. So listen to this one. C2 The Lewis leaves 5 stars and titles it Must Listen Podcast for Parents. This person writes, "The language of play is such a powerful podcast that every parent should take a listen. As a mother of 3 children and every stage of life, I appreciate the encouragement and education and support that her guests bring to the table. Her episodes are interesting and her guests are full of knowledge that makes you feel like you're not alone as a parent. A must listen for everyone with children." Thank you so much for that review. I'm glad you enjoy the guest episodes. Today we're going to have a solo episode, so you're just listening to me. And before we begin, I want to thank my sponsors. The first one is you don't have to do it all. Being a mom and a business owner means you're wearing all the hats, and it's exhausting. Cindy at lightningadminva.com can take some of that weight off your shoulders. She handles the admin, so you can show up for your family without letting your business fall behind. Email Cindy at lightningadminva.com to see how she can be a help for you. And I truly want to thank Dave Bindewald and the Center for Play and Exploration for sponsoring the Language of Play over the past 16 weeks. It's been a joy to have him on this team. Feeling stuck, maybe burned out, or like joy has slipped away. The good news is it's possible to rediscover delight even with little ones. The Center for Play and Exploration helps parents bring back the childlike wonder we have lost in the busyness of life. Imagine this. Changing how you think actually changes how you feel. That's the power you'll find when you connect with the center. Use the link in the show notes and mention the language of play for 20% off. And if you love inspiration at an event, Dave, the founder, is a wonderful speaker. As the Center for Play and Exploration is at the end of its sponsorship period, write down his contact information so that you don't lose track of it. And all the best to Dave, and many, many thanks. If you have been considering sponsoring the Language of Play, that is a click that is now available in the show notes, and you can email me as always at hello@thelanguageofplay.com. Now, one final thing before our episode gets rolling, and that is, if listening battles are wearing you down, here's some hope. Sometimes children aren't being defiant at all. They're just struggling to understand the speech or language in that direction following pattern that we give them. I put together a free guide for you that is titled 5 Ways to Get Your Kids to Listen Better. And these simple steps are going to help you reduce the stress so that listening struggles don't steal the joy from your relationship. So go to the show notes and get your free, powerful resource titled 5 Ways to Get Your Kids to Listen Better. All right, let's get into the meat of today's topic. And today's topic is, what are the causes of speech and language delays? Well, the answer is there are many causes. And this answer is quite long. And since there are so many causes, I'm going to divide it into two main areas. And those areas are nature versus nurture. Every child develops at their own pace. Sometimes speech and language grows more slowly, and that's okay. And this doesn't always mean something is wrong. Communication develops through that mix of nature and nurture, or we can say biology, and our experience and our relationships. And when one piece takes longer, it can delay our words. Now, you've heard me speak in the past about how lots of English words are multiple meaning words. So we're going to look at that word delay for just a moment. Sometimes when people say a speech and language delay, we're talking about a disability. And sometimes it is so benign, it just simply means slower. And it can also mean everything in between. The word delay isn't a word that absolutely defines one thing until we define what we mean when we use that word delay. So today, when I use the word delay, I am referring to the child that is developing behind the schedule that we would expect them to develop. I am not quantifying whether they're so far behind that we're going to say they're disabled by it, and I'm not going to quantify that they are just a little bit behind and we wish that they were further ahead. I don't want to break that apart. I want us to just think they're behind. I want us to also remember that because there's a delay, it doesn't mean that there will always be a delay. A delay is not necessarily permanent. In fact, as we go through this, you will learn how, with the right nurture of that nature-nurture contrast that I mentioned, your child will be able to lessen that delay, close that gap, and many, many times they catch up. So here we go. Let's talk about nature first. And when I talk about nature, I mean the genetics, the innate ability, what your child is born with, what's their heredity. So when we look at that, we've got the natural abilities that are biological and affect the development for our kids. So some kids are born with differences that make speech and language harder to master right away. So some common examples would be if they had neurological differences that set them apart right from the get-go, such as autism spectrum disorder, or otherwise referred to as ASD, or just autism. Now, I'm not going to get into, for this episode, causes of autism. There's a lot of debate out there. We're not getting into that in this episode. Another biological factor is going to be developmental language disorder. DLD is what it's called, or childhood apraxia of speech, CAS. And these are neurologic differences where our children were born with this situation, and it may mean that their brain needs a little extra time and extra practice. Another situation might be hearing loss or like these chronic ear infections that happen for some of our kiddos, because even mild or fluctuating hearing can make it hard for a child to consistently hear speech sounds, which then affects the speech development for many kids. Other genetic factors can sometimes run in families, such as how well the brain processes language. It is very common to see in families where there are language processing type of deficits or even speech sound disorders that it has been happening in other people in the family as well. And I feel like I should add the comment here that this is not a sign of low intelligence. It is very different. Another biological factor is going to be babies that are born early, so they're premature or they have low birth weight, because some of those kiddos need more time for their brain regions that handle speech and language to mature. Also in the nature side, which would be their biological side, might be physical or medical factors. So some kids have physical challenges that make speech harder to produce clearly, such as a tongue tie or oral muscle weakness, maybe cleft palate or dental issues, maybe ongoing congestion or breathing problems like mouth breathing. Speech-language pathologists can help identify and address these factors early on too. And I want to add the very normal part that some children with speech and language delays are simply late talkers. They may understand everything, but they take longer to use words. Some kiddos' brains just need extra time and extra practice and intentional interaction in order to catch up. And there's always a situation where we just don't know. Your doctor, your speech pathologist, whoever else is involved in the team, we just don't know why they're behind. And that also is a true cause, the I don't know cause. Nobody really likes that, but it is still true. So this was a list of the potential situations that come under the category I'm calling nature, that which our kiddos are born with, that which is genetic. Now let's move into nurture, and this is the one I always get excited to talk about. But before I talk about that, I want to make it clear I am not talking about you not being nurturing to your kids. I am not talking about something you're doing wrong. I'm talking about nurture from this very scientific perspective of nature being genetic and nurture being that which is in the environment, that which is our experiences, our relationships. Really, all the things that we can control or have some control over goes under nurture. One of the reasons that I love this topic is because of a man called Joe Dispenza. Joe Dispenza is a neuroscientist and author, and he's known for blending neuroscience, epigenetics, and physics to teach us how we can rewire the brain. His bio is much longer than that, but for the purpose of this episode, let us consider what he said in one of his books titled You Are the Placebo. He states that we all carry many genes, many potentials, including the vulnerabilities that we have because of being predisposed towards different problems. But only a small percentage of those get expressed, and that would be 5% or less. The rest, and this is what I think is powerful, he says 95% of our genes, it depends on how we live, how we behave, what the environments are, with our thoughts, our emotions. In other words, lifestyle and our internal state can override our genetic risks. Now, when I think about that and I think about the therapy model that we use in speech therapy, I think that they marry together really well. And when we're talking about speech and language delays, and we talk about the nature versus nurture, if a kiddo comes to us with an issue that is something they're born with, it is a nature issue. How we handle it, that's the nurture, how we handle it can change by 95% of what otherwise would have been the outcome. And I love that. That gives us all, parents and speech therapists and teachers, everybody, it gives us so much hope and so much power. And so even though Joe Dispenza is not somebody that is a speech therapist, he doesn't work in this field, I still love this quote because I see this kind of thing in action all the time. And I shouldn't have said the word quote because I didn't quote him. I was explaining what he said. So anyway, I love that philosophy, and I hope you embrace that as well. It's what I see lived out every day. All right, let's talk about those influencing factors along with the power you have in each case. So now we are into nurture, which is our environment, our epigenetics, our response to intervention, our relationships. So a reason that your child may be behind or delayed could be because they have had limited interaction or conversation. That would be an environmental factor, maybe a learning factor. We know that children grow through interaction. Children need to have their words heard, their faces seen. They need to learn how to take turns with other children. They need to learn how language and conversation goes back and forth in conversation. So if they haven't had interaction time, they will be delayed in this area. Children learn language by hearing it, and it needs to be directed at them. And then we need to wait and give them a chance to respond. And these are some of the skills that we learn in our parenting. Delays can be apparent when there's a limited one-on-one conversation time. So you ask, how does that happen? One way that happens is if you don't have a language-rich environment. Now, I have an episode on language-rich environments, so go ahead to the show notes to get a full explanation to what a language-rich environment really is and what it means. In a nutshell, the child is exposed to all of the language that he needs in order to build the skills we want him to have. Another apparent delay can come from too much screen time because screen replaces shared play. It can replace storytelling. It removes the need for back and forth conversation. So the use of screens really does limit how well a child learns language, especially in the 0 to 5 year range. If for a time you are in a chaotic and stressful environment, we see that can cause our children to get quieter and not talk as much. Sometimes the stressful environment is impacting the children so they become more noisy, but they're not really saying much. They're not interacting well. Maybe the stressful, chaotic environment is impacting the adults, and so they are not as responsive to the child's needs, and the child becomes less ready to learn. We know that stress and chaos in our environments cause any of us to not perform at the level we otherwise would. And another one might be an environmental condition that surprises you that I'll bring up, and that is when the child is not being required to communicate. This often happens with the youngest in the family, especially if there's a couple of older siblings that are particularly talkative and they talk for the younger child, or maybe the child has good nonverbals and you don't really realize that they're not using actual speech to communicate with you. In these kind of situations, the opportunities for exploring language and for playing with language are limited because others will talk over them and then they don't have to communicate. It can be a learned response. Another learned response is the quietness. If we're constantly helping our kids so much that they don't need to communicate their wants or their desires. Sometimes we need to set up the conditions so that they are stuck with the problem of having to communicate. We call that sabotage very lovingly, where we will give them an empty cup if they're thirsty. And then they need to say, water, or can I have water, or may I have some juice, or whatever level they're at, to set up the requirement to communicate for some of our children that are naturally more quiet. We must not forget that nutrition, sleep, and water impact our children tremendously. If they are lacking in proper nutrition, enough sleep, or enough clean water, they will not be performing properly. Their brains will not be functioning as well as they otherwise could have, and every one of those kind of things impacts speech and language. If your child is mouth breathing We question oxygenation. We question nitric oxide. We question all kinds of things. So if you have a child who is breathing through his mouth instead of using his nose, there is a change to the cognitive capacity and capabilities in that experience as well. And if that's the case, there's going to be an episode coming out on, I believe it's November 27th, that is on that topic of mouth breathing. And so come back and listen to that. But that too impacts the actual structure of how your mouth develops, which, of course, if the structure of your mouth is developed differently than normal, it impacts how you say speech sounds. And then another one I'm going to bring up, which I have seen far too often, is toxic exposure. We have an environment that has a lot of toxins in it these days, and learning how to detox our bodies is critically important. Even mold in our homes or schools or other buildings is something that would be a toxin to the body. So diet, nutrition, sleep, water, mouth breathing, toxins, mold, all of those kind of environmental factors can indeed impact if your child is delayed or not. But not from the sense of causing the delay in like a biological sense, but rather that it is an influence on how fast the child's language grows. So we use delay in that other meaning. And finally, I'm going to bring up the emotional and social factors. Children talk most when they feel safe and they feel seen, they feel understood. We mentioned stress and big transitions, anxiety. Those can temporarily slow speech down. When kids experience inconsistent connection or inconsistent encouragement from their caregiver, if there's mental health issues in the family going on, that can impact how well your child is communicating. Communication will naturally blossom again once some of these anxiety and stressful situations go down or the transition settles. So trauma also causes our kids to talk less. And we already mentioned over-helpful adults. It bears to mention again in this category of social emotional factors, because what our children learn from an over-helpful adult too often is that they are not capable. Of course, we never want to teach our kids that they're not capable, and yet sometimes that's what they actually end up learning. It lowers their confidence, causing them to speak less even if they understand. And the good news is that all of these nurture components, all of this stuff here at the end that I mentioned, all of it you have some control over. All of these things you have some kind of way to change. It might be changing how you understand, how you interact. It might be changing the environment. It might be setting up a way that your child is in a position to have to communicate. It could be going to the dentist to check on bite, or it could be listening to an episode about nutrition. So I will link in here. I do actually have some episodes on kids and sleep, kids and nutrition, kids and screens. I will put links in the show notes on many of these topics, and if there's a topic that you are particularly interested in learning about, feel free, as always, to email me at hello@thelanguageofplay.com. You can also scroll through the many episodes looking for a title that might be a topic you are interested in. Not always does a topic stay on the topic of the episode title, but many times, particularly with guest conversations, we cover lots of different topics, and I pick one of the many to be the show title because, of course, I get just a few words for that. So, in summary, the bottom line is that speech and language delays are common, and they're rarely caused by one single thing. Children learn best when adults provide warm, emotional connection, time for play and for conversation, and opportunities for the child to listen, to respond, and to be heard at the pace that the child is able to interact. And even when your child is experiencing a delay, this does not mean it's permanent, but it does mean that you should be paying attention to those factors that are nature and nurture. And then we fill the gaps in that communication need area. This is what we do in coaching. So we talk about what is going on with your child, and we start to interact about how you interact with them. And then I start to recognize patterns, because I assure you, after doing it for 3 decades, I see patterns. And when I tell you a pattern that you're using, and you are able to change it, and you do, your child naturally responds, and it is a joyful, joyful situation. And in closing, if you would like to talk about what's going on with your child, and you want to consider whether or not you would be a fit for coaching, scroll down to the show notes, and you can schedule yourself a conversation with me where we can discuss what is going on with your kiddo and what kinds of things can you do to help at home. And remember, parents, I am always cheering you on. Hey parents, I hope you found this episode helpful. If so, would you please take 30 seconds and share it with a friend who also lives or works with children? I would really appreciate it if you would leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I read every review, and it lights me up to know that this show is making a difference. Then come join my Facebook community, where you'll meet other parents who are dedicated to helping their children grow too. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me. Now it's time to go. Let's pop our kiddos in the strollers and go look around outdoors and see what we have to talk about.